The Pilgrim's Progress in Modern English, Chapter 17. As the time came for the pilgrims to continue their journey, they prepared themselves for the road ahead. They sent word to their friends, spent time together, and entrusted one another to the care and protection of their prince, pausing to pray and encouraging each other. Many of their friends brought gifts, supplies fit for both the weak and the strong, for the women and for the men, and they loaded them up with everything they would need for the journey. They honored us in many ways, and when we were ready to sail, they furnished us with supplies we needed. With these provisions, the pilgrims set out, their friends walking with them as far as they could. At the point of parting, they again commended one another to the care of their king and said their goodbyes. The company of pilgrims moved forward with great heart, leading the way. Because the women and children were not as strong, they traveled as slowly as needed. This allowed ready to halt and feeble mind to connect with their struggles, sharing in their condition with understanding hearts. When they had left the townspeople behind and their friends had bid them farewell, they soon came to the spot where faithful had been martyred. They stopped there, standing still, reflecting in silence, and thanking God for giving faithful the strength to bear his cross with such courage and grace. They were deeply moved, knowing that his steadfastness, brought a blessing to their own journey. From there, they walked further, talking along the way about Christian, faithful, and how hopeful joined Christian after faithful's death. Their conversation stirred their hearts as they reflected on God's work through these lives. Eventually, they reached the hill called Lucre, where the silver mine had ensnared Demas, luring him away from the pilgrimage, and, as some believed, where by-ends had fallen and met his end. They pondered this tragedy as they passed by. When they came to the ancient monument standing near the hill, a pillar of salt, they marveled, just as Christian had before. How could people so wise and knowledgeable be so blinded as to turn aside for such fleeting temptations? Yet they understood. The sinful nature is not easily swayed by the misfortunes of others, especially when something shines brightly enough to lure the foolish eye. I saw that they passed by and they pressed onward until they reached a river. Lying at the base of the Delectable Mountains, this river was lined with beautiful trees whose leaves were said to heal sickness when consumed. The meadows there were lush and green year-round, a safe and peaceful place to rest. By the riverside, among the meadows, there were sheepfolds and shelters for the lambs, the children, and the women pilgrims. A house stood there, entrusted to a caretaker filled with compassion. This man would gather the lambs in his arms, carry them close to his heart, and gently guide those expecting young. Christiana encouraged her 4 daughters to entrust their little ones to his care. Here, by the waters, the children could be sheltered, nourished, and protected, never lacking in anything they needed. The caretaker promised that if any strayed, he would bring them back. If any were hurt, he would bind their wounds and heal them. He would strengthen the sick and ensure no harm came to them. In this place, the children would always have food, drink, and clothing. They would be safe from thieves and robbers because the caretaker was willing to lay down his life for any of them. Here, they would receive nurture and guidance, taught to walk in the right paths. And what a privilege this was, a favor of no small account. The setting itself was delightful. There were crystal clear waters, vibrant meadows, delicate flowers, and an abundance of trees bearing good fruit. Unlike the fruit Matthew had once eaten, the kind that fell from Beelzebub's garden. This fruit, on the other hand, this brought health and life, restoring the weak and increasing the strength of the healthy. The Pilgrims were content to entrust their little ones to the caretaker. What reassured them most was that all of this refuge, this care, this provision was provided by the King himself. It was indeed a royal hospital for young children and for orphans. They continued on their journey. When they reached Bypath Meadow, they arrived at the stile where Christian and his companion Hopeful had once crossed, only to be captured by Giant Despair and imprisoned in Doubting Castle. They paused there, sitting down to discuss what they should do. Given their current strength and having Mr. Greatheart as their guide, they wondered if they should take action against the giant, destroy his castle, and set any imprisoned pilgrims free before moving forward. Some argued one way, while others disagreed. One person questioned whether it was right to step onto unconsecrated ground. Another said it would be acceptable, provided their goal was good. At that, Mr. Greatheart spoke up with conviction. Though that statement cannot always hold true, I have a command to resist sin, to overcome evil, and to fight the good fight of faith. And I ask you, who better to fight the good fight of faith than Giant Despair himself? I will go. I will take his life and demolish Doubting Castle. Then he boldly asked, who will go with me? Old Honest stood up immediately. I will go. Christiana's 4 sons, Matthew, Samuel, Joseph, and James, all stepped forward with resolve, saying, we will go too. For they were young men, full of strength and courage. They decided to leave the women behind on the road, along with Mr. Feeblemind and Mr. Ready to Halt, who stayed with his crutches to guard them until the others returned. The place was so close to where Giant Despair lived that even a child could safely lead those who stayed behind, provided they remained on the road. So Mr. Greatheart and Old Honest and the 4 young men set out towards Doubting Castle, determined to find Giant Despair. When they reached the gates, they made a loud resounding knock that echoed with force. The noise drew the attention of the giant himself, who came to the gate, followed by his wife, Diffidence. Giant Despair bellowed, who dares disturb me in this manner? Mr. Greatheart stepped forward and declared, it is I, Greatheart, one of the king's guides. For pilgrims' journeys in the celestial city, I demand you open the gates for my entry and prepare yourself for battle. I have come to take your head and to destroy Doubting Castle. Giant Despair, in his arrogance, thought no one could ever defeat him. I am a giant, he thought, and I have conquered even angels in the past. Shall this man, Greatheart, make me tremble? With that, he armed himself for fight. He donned a steel cap on his head and a breastplate that seemed to burn like fire, and iron shoes. In his massive hand, he gripped a great club. The 6 men stood their ground, surrounding him from all sides. When Diffidence, his wife, came out to aid him, Old Honest struck her down with a single decisive blow. The battle raged on as they fought for their lives. Giant Despair was ferocious and stubborn, refusing to die easily. He struggled fiercely, as though he had the strength of many lives. But in the end, Greatheart prevailed. He did not stop until he severed the giant's head from his shoulders. Then they set out to demolish Doubting Castle. Since Giant Despair was already dead, the task was not difficult. It took them 7 days to tear it down completely. Inside the castle, they found a pilgrim named Mr. Despondency, who was barely alive. starving to death, and his daughter, much afraid. These two they rescued, saving them from their suffering. But what a horrifying sight it was. Dead bodies scattered across the castle yard and the dungeon, filled with piles of bones. When Mr. Greatheart and his companions had completed this great act, they took Mr. Despondency and Much Afraid under their care. These were good and honest people, despite having been prisoners of that tyrant, Giant Despair. The group buried the giant's body under a pile of stones and brought his severed head with them. They returned to the road, where the companions eagerly awaited them. When Mr. Feeblemind and Mr. Ready to Halt saw the head of Giant Despair, their spirits lifted. They were overjoyed and filled with delight. Seeing their happiness, Christiana and her daughters-in-law Mercy decided to add to the celebration. Christiana played a melody on the viol, and Mercy joined in with the lute. Their music was lively and joyful, and soon Ready to Halt couldn't resist. He began to dance. He and Much Afraid by the hand, and the two of them, they danced right there on the road. Though Ready to Halt needed one of his crutches to keep his balance, he danced skillfully also, and Much Afraid kept perfect rhythm with the music moving gracefully. When Mr. Despondency, however, was more interested in food than dancing, as he was still weak from starvation. Seeing his condition, Christiana offered him some of her spirits to revive him immediately, then prepared a meal for him. After eating and drinking, the old man regained his strength. His face lit up with a sense of renewal. In my dream, I saw that when all was done, Mr. Greatheart took the head of Giant Despair and mounted it on a pole by the side of the highway, right across from the pillar Christian had placed as a warning to future pilgrims. Beneath the pole, he carved these words into a marble stone: "This is the head of one whose name alone once struck fear in Pilgrim's heart. Now his castle lies in ruins, and his wife, Diffidence, lost too by Greatheart's strife. Despondency and Much Afraid he saved. For them, his valiant efforts he braved. Let doubters who stumble look and see. Here's proof of faith's triumph decree. This head, where doubters' feet now dance, declares their freedom from fear's stance." After their courageous victory of Doubting Castle, the group moved forward on their journey. They traveled until they reached the Delectable Mountains, where Christian and Hopeful had once found refreshment. There, they too enjoyed the beauty and richness of this place. The shepherds, who had welcomed Christian and Hopeful before, greeted Mr. Greatheart and his large company warmly. Seeing the impressive group followed by Mr. Greatheart, the shepherds asked them, "Good sir, you have gathered quite a company. Where did you find all these companions?" Mr. Greatheart replied with pride, "First, here is Christiana and her faithful band, sons and their wives, who together stand. They steer by the companions, their path made clear, turning from sin to grace as they are here. Next is Honest, an elder pilgrim true, and Ready to Halt, whose heart is steady too. Feeble Mind joins us, unwilling to stay behind. Despondency is here, and his daughter Much Afraid you'll find. May we stay here with you. Can we trust that your hospitality will welcome us?" Then the shepherd said, "This is a wonderful company. You are all welcome here. We have provisions for the weak as well as for the strong. Our prince watches closely over what is done for the least among us, so infirmity will never be a barrier to our hospitality." They led the group to the palace door and said, "Come in, Mr. Feeblemind. Come in, Mr. Ready to Halt. Come in, Mr. Despondency. And you too, Mrs. Much Afraid." Turning to Mr. Greatheart, the shepherd explained, "We call these by name because they are most prone to shrink back. But as for you and the others who are strong, we trust you will come in freely." Hearing this, Mr. Greatheart replied, Today I see that grace truly shines in your faces. You are indeed my Lord's shepherds, for you have not pushed the weak aside nor ignored their frailty. Instead, you paved the way for the palace with flowers and where the shepherds should come. The weak and feeble entered first, followed by Mr. Greatheart and the rest. Once everyone was seated, the shepherds turned to those who were weaker and gently asked, "What do you need?" Here, everything is arranged to strengthen the weak, while also guiding and correcting those who are unruly. Then they prepared a feast of food, simple, easy to digest, and nourishing to the body. It was delicious and perfectly suited to the needs of all present. After they had eaten, the pilgrims went to rest, each finding a place prepared just for them. When the morning came, the day was bright, the sky was clear, because the mountains were high and the shepherds had a custom of showing rare sights to pilgrims before they departed. They led the group out to the fields. First, they showed them the same wonders they had revealed to Christian before. Then they took the pilgrims to new places. The first was Mount Marvel. From there, they saw far off in the distance a man who appeared to move mountains with his words. The pilgrims, amazed, asked the shepherds what this meant. The shepherds explained, "That man is the son of Mr. Great Grace, whose story is told in the first part of the Pilgrim's Progress. He has been placed there to teach pilgrims how, by faith, to overcome the difficulties they encounter, to cast obstacles out of their way." Hearing this, Mr. Greatheart exclaimed, "I know him. He is a man of great renown." Next, they were taken to Mount Innocence, where they saw a man dressed entirely in white. Two men named Prejudice and Ill Will were continually throwing dirt at him. Yet, no matter how much they threw, the dirt slid off, and his garment remained as spotless as if no dirt had ever touched it. The pilgrims asked, "What does this mean?" The shepherds replied, "This man's name is Godly Man, and his white garment represents the innocence of his life. The two men throwing dirt at him are those who hate his good deeds, but as you can see, the dirt cannot stick to him. This is to show that no matter how much the wicked try to defile someone who lives righteously, their efforts are in vain. God ensures that in time, their innocence shines like the morning light and their righteousness blazes like the noonday sun." Then they brought them to Mount Charity, where they saw a man with a bundle of cloth lying before them. From this cloth, he cut coats and garments for the poor gathered around him. Yet, astonishingly, his bundle of cloth never grew smaller. The pilgrims, amazed, asked, "What does this mean?" The shepherds explained, "This is to show you that those who give generously to the poor will never lack. He who waters others will himself be refreshed, just like the widow who gave a cake to the prophet and still had enough in her jar." Next, they brought them to another place, where they saw two men, full and want-wit, attempting to wash an Ethiopian in order to make him white. Yet, the more they scrubbed, the darker he appeared. The pilgrims asked, "What does this signify?" The shepherds replied, "This represents the vile person. Every effort to give such a one good reputation will ultimately fail, only making them appear even more disgraceful. It was like this with the Pharisees, and it is the same with all hypocrites." At that moment, Mercy, the wife of Matthew, turned to Christiana and said, "Mother, I would like, if it is possible, to see the hole in the hill, the one they call Byway to Hell." Hearing this, Christiana shared her request with the shepherds, who led them to the entrance. It was on the side of the hill, The shepherds opened the door and told Mercy, "Listen carefully for a while." Mercy leaned in and heard voices from within. One cried out, "Cursed be my father for keeping me from the way of peace and life." Another voice wailed, "Oh, that I had been torn apart before I lost my soul to save my life." Yet another lamented, "If I could live again, I would deny myself everything rather than end up in this place." As Mercy listened, it seemed as if the very ground trembled beneath her feet, groaning in despair. Overcome with fear, she turned pale and came away trembling, exclaiming, "Blessed are those who are delivered from such a place." After the shepherds had shown them all these things, they brought them back to the palace and treated them to the best hospitality the house could provide. During this time, Mercy, being a young married woman, found herself longing for something she had seen in the palace but was too shy to ask for it. Christiana noticed her unease and asked, "What's troubling you, my daughter? Why don't you look well?" Mercy hesitated before confessing, "There is a looking glass in the dining room. I can't stop thinking about it. If I don't have it, I fear I will become ill." Christiana reassured her, "I will ask the shepherds on your behalf. They won't deny you something so good." But Mercy protested, "I'm ashamed for them to know that I long for it." Christiana gently replied, "My daughter, there is no shame in longing for something so virtuous." Mercy finally agreed and said, "Then, mother, if you're willing, please ask them if they would sell it to me." Now the glass was extraordinary. It could reflect a person's exact features in one way and then another way reveal the very image of the Prince of Pilgrims himself. Some who had looked into it claimed they had seen the crown of thorns on his head, the wounds in his hands and feet, and even the scar in his side. The glass could reveal him in any state, whether living or dead, on earth or in heaven, in his humility or his exaltation, as a suffering Savior or the reigning King. Christiana went to the shepherds privately, whose names were Knowledge, Experience, Watchful, and Sincere, and said, "One of my daughters, who is with child, longs for something she has seen in your house. She believes she might fall ill if she is denied." Experience immediately responded, "Call her, call her. She shall certainly have whatever we can give her." They called Mercy over and asked, "What is it that you desire?" Blushing deeply, she replied, "The great glass hanging in the dining room." Sincere ran quickly to retrieve it, and with joy he agreed, and the shepherds gave it to her. Mercy bowed her head, overwhelmed with gratitude, and said, "Now I know I have found favor in your eyes." They also gave to the others young women whatever they desired, and offered great praise to their husbands for joining Mr. Greatheart in slaying giant Despair and demolishing Doubting Castle. Around Christiana's neck, the shepherd placed a beautiful bracelet, and they did the same with her 4 daughters. They adorned the women further with earrings and jewels upon their foreheads, each detailed with crafted and with great care. When the time came for them to leave, the shepherds sent them on their way in peace. However, unlike the instructions given to Christian and his companion, the pilgrims did not receive specific warnings. The reason was simple. They had Mr. Greatheart as their guide, a man deeply familiar with the path and its dangers. He could provide the necessary cautions precisely when the threats were near, making them far more effective. Christian and his companion, on the other hand, had received their warnings in advance, but by the time the danger approached, the advice had been forgotten. In this, Christiana's company had a distinct advantage over the others. With joyful hearts they set out, singing as they went, "Behold, how perfectly the stages are set, to give relief to all who become pilgrims yet. How warmly they welcome those who make their aim to seek a life beyond this world of shame. What treasures and wonders they so freely give, that even as pilgrims we may joyfully live. The gifts they bestow tell us worlds we belong. As pilgrims marked by the journey we are on.